You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. To Israel we go. With us right now is Ariel Oseran. He's the Middle East correspondent for I24. They're a TV that you can see in America and Israel and England, the different parts of the world. And his beat is the Middle East, but also Palestinian affairs and Iran. So, Ariel, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Zev. Great to be here.
Thank you. You've had a very hard week. And I mean, when I say you, I mean the collective you in Israel, between the terrorist attacks, and you've had demonstrations in Tel Aviv and in Israel. You have the Blinken visit to go. So tell us what exactly, let's first start with the terrorist attack, which there were two of them this past weekend. There are a lot of tensions. Are things a little better now than they were a week ago, or there's still a lot of tension in the air?
Well, Zev, I think we're talking now on Thursday. We're capping a week of a lot of events, a unique escalation, I would say, in this broader escalation of violence that we've seen over the past year. We just finished the month of January, but the year of 2022 was considered the most violent in the West Bank. Most deaths of Palestinians and Jews in years, and because of the spike in Palestinian terror attacks, Israel has also ramped up its operations in the West Bank with almost nightly raids in an operation called Breaking the Wave. So far, 2,500 terror suspects have been arrested in these raids that have been going on, as I said, almost nightly for months. But so what changed last Thursday? What changed is that Israel, based on very pinpoint intelligence, conducted an operation deep within the refugee camp of Jenin. That is one of the major Palestinian cities in the northern part of the West Bank, but it's also emerged as a terror hub in recent months. And most of Israel's operations have been focusing on Jenin, also Nablus, mainly in the refugee camps there, where Palestinian security forces they haven't been operating there regularly. And so into that vacuum, Israeli security forces have been going in. What happened Thursday was a raid that led to the death of 9 Palestinians, almost all of them gunmen, terrorists affiliated with different Palestinian factions. And that led to a flurry of condemnation and responses, not only from the Palestinian factions, but also from the Palestinian leadership. Everyone calling it the massacre of Jenin, and the factions vowed to respond. Following that, there was a rocket fire last Friday morning. Friday evening, there was the deadly terror attack in a synagogue in Neve Yaakov in East Jerusalem. 7 Israelis were killed and 3 more were injured. The following morning, a stabbing attack just outside the old city. 2 Israelis, a father and son, were wounded. The attacker, the stabber, was a 13-year-old. I correct myself. It wasn't a stabbing, it was a shooting attack.
It was a shooting, yes.
A shooting attack, apologies, in the neighborhood of Silwan. And since then, there was a little bit of a lull in the violence during the visit of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the region. He had a 2-day snap visit in Cairo, Jerusalem, and Ramallah. It was actually interesting to see that during that time there weren't any significant attacks, but then just hours after taking off there was already a car ramming attack, or suspected attack, in the West Bank. And to cap off this week of unique escalation, last night there were 2 barrages of rockets from the Gaza Strip to southern Israel. Most of the rockets were either intercepted or didn't reach Israel. And this was caused, or at least the Palestinian factions explained this, that it's not only as revenge for Jenin, but this is something new, the issue of the Palestinian security prisoners being detained in Israeli prisons. This is a new issue that the Palestinian, not new, but an issue that the Palestinian factions are trying to bring forward to the forefront as a new cause for escalation. And so we can get into that further deeper if you would like. But basically, what I tried to just outline is how after months of escalation, volatile up and down, this week was a unique shift that does have potential to further escalate situations, because we have a combination of terror attacks in Jerusalem, in the West Bank. We have rockets from Gaza, and also these attacks are becoming more deadly. The use of lethal weapons, guns rather than knives. So this is a concerning week that has not only Israeli security establishment kind of trying to contain this and seeing what can be done, but also international partners. Jordan, mainly Egypt, are in the mix trying to de-escalate the situation.
Now, when they're trying to de-escalate, you're talking about that they're meeting with Hamas representatives. Are they meeting with the Palestinian Authority? Because from what I've read, is lots of times Egypt has been more, I think, working with trying to get Hamas to tame down in the Gaza.
So Egypt is perhaps the actor with the most sway over Hamas, because they control the border with Gaza, and also, you know, the Palestinians accuse Israel of imposing a blockade for many years. Egypt is a side to that blockade along with Israel. That's always important to remind, because it explains the sway and the leverage that Egypt holds over Hamas, and why they're such an influential player here. But Egypt has been talking to all groups in the Palestinian Authority. Also, the official leadership Cairo sent its head of intelligence, Abbas Kamel, who met with Palestinian President Abbas just before Abbas's meeting with Secretary Blinken earlier this week. In that meeting was also the Jordanian head of intelligence, and in that meeting, the Egyptians pressured, this is according to reports in Arab media, pressured President Abbas to resume the security cooperation with Israel, because a reminder, following the Jenin raid last Thursday, which started this whole thing, the Palestinian Authority later that day announced that it was stopping the security coordination with Israel, something that could have significant repercussions to the security situation in the area. And in addition, so the Egyptians, in addition to meeting with Palestinian President Abbas, there's also a delegation of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that is heading to Cairo tomorrow, headed by the head of the organization, Ziad Nakhala. So the Egyptians are indeed speaking with everyone, also with Hamas, obviously, because they're the ones who are ruling the Gaza Strip.
Is Hezbollah at play at all in all these negotiations? Are they playing any factor in what's happening?
They're not playing a factor in terms of how the events develop, but they're watching this on the sidelines, of course, praising every attack, including the Friday deadly synagogue attack, and they're looking to see how Israel responds, trying to learn Israel. But as far as having any influence on what happens on the ground, that's a different front. However, they will be a part to this if they decide to join the fray and open a northern front. This is something that Israel is always keeping an open mind for. But as of now, we don't see any movement in that direction.
Now, is the attacks in Neve Yaakov, the killing of 7 individuals, and also the father and son attack the day later with machine gun fire, is this being coordinated by any group that we know? Because the impression is this is just people doing it on their own, but it's too planned, and it happens too close to what happened in Jenin that to say that just happened randomly. It seems like it was there waiting for an opportunity to take place. So
there's a few elements to this. First of all, I think the main question, if I understood it correctly, is are these 2 terrorists, have they been receiving any backing, or do they have any affiliation to terror organizations? So the answer, at least according to the Israeli security establishment, is no. These are what are called lone wolf attacks. It's kind of an ironic name given that there's so many of these lone wolf attacks over the past year. But what constitutes a lone wolf attack is someone who does not have any security background, is not under the radar, is not on the radar of Israeli security authorities, and has no known affiliation to groups or contact in that way. So that is relevant to both the I think it was 21-year-old attacker in Neve Yaakov and the 13-year-old attacker in Silwan. The bigger question here is, how did they get the guns? Because they both used guns in their attacks, and this is something that that has not only the police but also the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency. I won't say scratching their heads, but it does make it very challenging when these individuals without any official formal affiliation with groups, how do they manage to get these weapons? This is perhaps the main challenge in trying to thwart the next attacks, in addition to the operations against the more formal, better established terror groups. That is a different course of action.
Ariel Oseran is our guest, the I24, that the news channel, their Middle East correspondent, handles Palestinian affairs as well as Iran. What intrigues me about the terrorist incident that took place is that, number one, is that, like you said, they have guns, but they had to have some training. How does a 13-year-old become proficient how to using a weapon? You have to have some sort of training. And part two, and I understand that the thinking is that it's a lone wolf, but how do you control lone wolves when Blinken's in town? So how do you get the message across that there shouldn't be any attacks when he's in town or some prominent official, and as soon as he's gone, they're back to it? So there has to be some coordination somehow, or am I missing something?
No, I don't think you're missing something. I think it's a very valid question. I don't have an intelligent answer to that as to the connection, given that these are indeed individuals without any known affiliation. It is believed, in terms of the proximity to Jenin, that the Friday synagogue shooting, the deadly attack there, was in revenge for Jenin, and that the attack the following morning, the shooting in Silwan by the 13-year-old, was what's considered a copycat attack to the attack in Neve Yaakov. That's kind of the dynamics of terror attacks in Israel. You have a raid that for the Palestinians ends with a lot of casualties, and then you have retaliatory attacks, and then you have copycat attacks to those. That is the normal inertia of terror attacks here. How does that affect timing of whether Blinken is here or not? It could be a matter of common sense for the attackers, if that's something, a benefit of the doubt that we can give them.
Is a 13-year-old taking political calculations into account when he's doing his?
No, he did it before. That was before
Right.
Blinken's visit. He didn't wait.
But the other 13-year-olds didn't act, or the 20-year-old didn't act afterwards. But my question though is, it seemed, listen, if you're going to do an attack, you have to do some planning. So within a day after the Jenin raid, you have an attack on a synagogue. I don't know. It just seems to me that they were just looking for an opportunity, and it was waiting. It wasn't that they just all of a sudden took out a gun and said, "I'm going to shoot." They were waiting to do so, and they had the plan in place. And when something happens, they just institute it. That's how I'm looking at it.
Look, Zev, getting into the mind of a terrorist, when do they decide to carry out an attack? That's something that you have professionals that dedicate years of learning into. As far as the way Israeli security establishment views it, there are a lot of elements at play in the decision-making of these terrorists. A lot of them, regardless of the political motivation for these attacks, which even according to Israeli security agency, isn't always the leading factor in the decision-making to carry out a terror attack. A lot of times it stems from personal grievances, and as well as religious incitement and a bunch of all kinds of factors. And sometimes this is also something that Israeli officials will sign off on. They're Palestinians who want to commit suicide, and the best way to do it without bringing shame to their family is to attack an Israeli, whether it's a civilian or a soldier. This is just shows the complexity that you have all these elements at play. Add to that, you have the situation on the ground. You have what they call a massacre in Jenin, and you have a new national security minister that is bringing back into play tensions in Al-Aqsa. It boils, and sometimes unfortunately, without premeditation, it is possible for someone who does have the capability at home, a 13-year-old, whether he has access to a gun at home, that just something snaps, not random. It's a buildup of all these different elements. And given that he has the possibility to carry it out, he does.
You said something very interesting, which I never thought about, and I really think it's something worthwhile discussing, is that somebody who may be depressed and is contemplating suicide, instead of just going ahead with it, where we're chaining the family, they can do a suicide mission and kill Jews, kill Israelis, and at the same time be a martyr and don't bring shame to their family.
Indeed, that's a minority of the cases. It's important. I don't want to paint a misconception. Most of the attacks, the vast majority, are indeed politically motivated. A lot of them based and flared up by religious incitement. But yes, there are a lot of factors here, and it is a very complicated reality for these Palestinians.
But my question though is, the Palestinian terror chiefs, do they look for these kind of individuals that might be a loner, might have issues, and say, listen, here you can do something and make yourself known? Do they play on these people's fears? That's my follow-up question to it.
Indeed, the long and short of it is yes. You can see it very clearly on a daily basis on Palestinian social media, many of them affiliated, Telegram, Twitter accounts affiliated to the armed wings of these groups, that they're pushing these messages every day, sharing pictures of Jews going to the Temple Mount, giving numbers, every day saying the new measures that the Israel prison services are taking to crack down on Palestinian security prisoners. One of the most recent steps was a reshuffle of about 2,000 out of the 4,600 security prisoners, Palestinians in Israeli jails, were moved in order to try and weaken the power groups that have emerged in the prisons. Because in an important arena in the Palestinian street is the prison, the Palestinian security prisoners. Many of them are political leaders. Marwan Barghouti, if you look at the Palestinian polls, he's a leading candidate to succeed President Abbas. And if we're looking at what the Palestinian factions have been trying to do since the May 21 Guardian of the Walls operation, the 11 days of violence, what they're trying to do is what's called tying all the arenas together. The arena of what happens in Gaza influences what happens in the West Bank, influences what happens in Jerusalem. And the fourth arena is the prison, the Palestinian security prisoners. They have prominent status in the Palestinian street. And prior to last night's rocket fire, Palestinian social media affiliated with the terror groups shared audio recording purporting to be of a voice of a female prisoner in an Israeli prison calling for the resistance to act for them, to show their resolve. Following that, we had 2 barrages of rockets. One of the rockets had a writing on it that didn't explode. One of the rockets that did not explode had a message on it saying, "This is for our female prisoners." And so this just shows how by trying to tie all the different arenas together, it makes it a lot easier for the faction to cause flare-ups, but also to incite and encourage individuals to act because it's all connected. So whenever Hamas is attacked in Gaza, they're calling on their people, on Palestinians in East Jerusalem to carry out attacks, in the West Bank to carry out attacks. And this tying together the arenas is a significant challenge strategically for Israel.
No, I think they're connecting everything, connecting all the dots. We call it in America intersectionality, where they have all the left-wing groups, all, you attack one part, everything is all together. I'm curious to know the two attackers, they were from East Jerusalem, correct?
Yes.
And so that created another security headache because Israel can monitor better in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria than they can Jews living Palestinian Arabs living in Jerusalem or Israeli Arabs, because we have all these factors Israel's security has to contend with.
Right, and what's unique, what differentiates Palestinians living in East Jerusalem as opposed to Palestinians living in the West Bank?
I should really call them Israeli Arabs, right? Even though they have Israeli citizenship.
Yeah, they're citizens. There's been a fraction, a very small minority of attacks carried out by Israeli Arab citizens, but the vast majority, they are a consideration for Israeli security authorities, but the main threat comes from security-wise comes from Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. But what makes East Jerusalem unique is because it's under Israeli municipal sovereignty. They all residents there have Israeli ID card, which not only awards them benefits like Social Security and healthcare, but also gives them freedom of movement throughout all of Israel. And that does make it more challenging for Israeli security authorities to thwart these in advance. And another consideration, some of these attacks recently have also been carried out by people with work permits in Israel. And that also is a challenge because at the end of the day, 120,000 Palestinians living in the West Bank come to Israel on a daily basis, day laborers, go in and out, and the money that they earn in Israel is, the wages are 10, sometimes 20 times higher than what they would make back home in the West Bank. And so that is also seen as a method to lower tensions and to maintain stability. And whenever something like ceasing security coordination could also spiral, create a chain of events that would lead to closing the crossings, and then these day laborers can't go in, and that would lead to more destabilization. So there are so many factors in here at play, and the fact that the challenge of the Israeli ID card for East Jerusalem, that does make that a more significant challenge for Israeli security. Yeah.
Ariel Oseran is our guest. He's the I24, that's a television channel, Middle Eastern correspondent. He handles Palestinian affairs and Iran. Tell us about the Blinken visit to Israel and the surrounding areas. What did it accomplish? What was said? What was done?
What was accomplished? That's a good question. I think it depends on who you're asking and what their goals were. I think if you ask the Biden administration what the goals of the visit were, it was to show U.S. presence, that the White House is ready to send its highest diplomat on a snap visit just days after an escalation. So I think the messaging, at least from Washington, was to show that the Biden administration is here, is attentive to both sides. And we saw that from Blinken's meetings with both Israeli and Palestinian leadership. But if you ask the Palestinians what they got out of the visit, they'll say not much. I mean, $50 million to the UN Palestinian agency, UNRWA, 4G, an agreement to establish 4G network in the Palestinian territories. I don't think that's those are the most pressing issues when trying to de-escalate the situation, or to create what Blinken was lamenting the absence of, a horizon of of a better future for the Palestinians. I don't think there were any breakthrough developments coming out from this visit. Same for Israel as well. I think it was an opportunity for all sides to voice their concerns to the Biden administration, but I think all sides involved know that the capabilities of the Biden administration to really influence directly and cause immediate de-escalation, that capability is limited.
Very limited in that. Is Mahmoud Abbas going to go back to the security arrangement? Because it's really in his interest to have the security arrangement. It not only protects Israelis from terror, but it also protects the Palestinian Authority and their corrupt administration from attacks by terrorist groups too. Because there's a lot of tension even within Fatah. There's been no elections. He's aging. There's soon going to be a struggle for leadership. So, do you think he's going to be going back relatively soon to the security arrangement?
I don't want to put a time frame on it, but I think it is, at the end of the day, it will be inevitable. The PA can't sustain itself without the security coordination with Israel, given the fact that the Palestinian security agencies are, whether they're unwilling or incapable, that's a whole other discussion, but they are not acting as they need to be in the West Bank, mainly in Jenin and Nablus, the terror hubs that we identified earlier in the discussion. And Israel enters that vacuum. And if we're talking about the messaging coming out from Egypt, Egypt is also pressuring the PA to resume security coordination and to employ its, I won't say sovereignty, because sovereignty is not in abundance in the West Bank, but to apply its force in the northern part of the West Bank. I don't know how feasible that is, and if you add to that the different elements that are challenging the PA, because it's believed, Palestinian analysts that I speak to that explain about the PA's legitimacy, that continues to be waning regardless of the elections or the lack thereof, but that is a main factor there. I will just add regarding the security coordination that this isn't the first time it's been cut, and last time it was a few years back, it continued under the table. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's continuing under the table right now as well. But we're in a certain climate in the Palestinian street that Abbas cannot resume it officially, at least not now, but it is inevitable, and he doesn't have another choice, basically.
Ari, let me ask you, how does the new Israeli government that's more religious oriented, a little more conservative, more right wing than previous administration, does that play any role in the increased tensions?
I think yes, because of also physical steps that are being taken on the ground. This includes the crackdown on the prisons, and also Israel's new national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, ultra-nationalist. Already in his first week in office, he visited the Temple Mount. While that's not unique or unheard of, he is part of his agenda is to promote Jewish prayer up in Al-Aqsa, in the Temple Mount compound, which is also the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And that is continuing the erosion of the status quo up there.
But forgive me, let me ask you a question, Ariel. It always bothered me, and I went up to the Temple Mount once, is that a Jew or anybody is not allowed to say a prayer. You can't even drink from the water fountain on the Temple Mount. I just don't see how that should be a factor. There should be a freedom of expression, a freedom of religion, and I'm not even sure how that got enshrined in as far as the status quo. But praying there, I just find it offensive as a Jew that a Jew is not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. Forgive me, I just don't understand why that's part of the whole equation.
Look, there is a legitimate debate to have on the freedom of worship in the Temple Mount Al-Aqsa compound that I think you raise a valid point. However, the reality is that it's not under Israeli control. It's under Israeli security control, but it's not run by Israel. And so Israel does not call the shots as to what happens there. There is no real tangible treaty that establishes the practices that go on there, but it's not up to Israel to change it unilaterally. This does need to be, if we look at also the institution of status quo, how it works, but also in terms of Israel's security interests, these everything regarding the Temple Mount Al-Aqsa Mosque needs to be done in coordination with the Jordanian government and the Waqf, the Muslim endowment. And for the past, I think, 5 years, the Israeli police has had almost no contact with the Palestinian Waqf, with the Muslim endowment running the show there. And over these past 5 years, we have seen a deterioration, not only in the status quo, but also in tensions. And the flare-ups up there have become more prevalent. And like I said, it's debatable whether it is legitimate for this to deteriorate because of the change of the status quo, but that is the reality.
So why
that is
isn't
the reality that Israel
why
needs
isn't
to
there
face.
more communication? They don't have to coordinate security. So why isn't there a breakdown? What happened 5 years ago that changed the status quo as far as cooperation is concerned?
Just growing, increasing tensions, increasing friction, that political elements were trying to influence the police practices, how they're conducted there, making it more lenient to allow for Jews. Because in the past 2-3 years, we have moved from a situation where there has been no Jewish prayer in the Temple Mount compound to the fact that you have daily Jewish prayer there. And
there is daily Jewish prayer?
not formally, but on a daily basis, Jews perform prayers there. Yeah, I see these videos twice a week. So maybe not daily. I can say I see videos twice a week of this. I would imagine it happens every time there are visits up there. Again, we can debate about the legitimacy of that, but that does have an effect on the cooperation between Israeli authorities and the Waqf. And the more this status quo is eroding, so is also happening to the coordination between the sides.
Ariel, we have only a couple moments left. I'm curious to know, looking at the broader Middle Eastern picture and the Abrahamic Accords, how is the recent tensions affecting, or is it affecting, the new cooperation between Israel and Morocco and UAE, and maybe even eventually Saudi Arabia?
There's still time until Saudi Arabia. They keep on reminding Israel and everyone that first peace with the Palestinians, then normalization. But if we look at Israel's new partners, as you mentioned, Morocco, UAE, and Bahrain, they don't like to see this escalation. It makes it more, it gives them a headache back home, because the Palestinian issue, I think we got in the recent Qatar World Cup, we all received a reminder as to how prevalent it is as a uniting agenda issue for Arabs and Muslims around the world, including for people in those countries. They would like to see fewer terror attacks, but they would also like to see fewer Israeli raids in the West Bank. And as long as there aren't Palestinian raids in the West Bank, there will continue to be Israeli raids, and that will be this frustrates them, but there isn't much they can do. So most of their influence and coordination, cooperation with Israel is in the business, high tech, pharmaceutical, business investments, rather than trying to have any security influence or stuff in those issues.
Ariel Oseran, the Middle Eastern correspondent for I24. You can watch him on TV in the U.S., in Israel, and UK, and other parts of the world. Thank you for being here with us. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Zev. It was a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.